My name is Margaret Quinn, but everyone who's ever really known me just calls me Maggie. I'm 73 now, with fingers curled from time and too many winters stirring stew pots and peeling potatoes. For over 40 years, I was the cook at the Whitmore estate, a sprawling hilltop mansion tucked away in the green folds of Connecticut's wealthier corners. I wore the same uniform each day, plain, practical, ironed crisp, and kept mostly to the kitchen, behind doors that whispered secrets I wasn't meant to hear. But I did hear them. Oh, I heard everything. When I started working there, I was only 29. My husband had left me with nothing but a stack of unpaid bills and a bleeding heart. I needed a job. Mr. Charles Whitmore was looking for someone trustworthy, discreet, and not too chatty. That's what the housekeeper told me when she gave me a once-over like I was a cut of meat in a butcher's window. Apparently, I passed. I signed a thick contract that promised good pay, a private room on the grounds, and, unspoken but understood, a life of invisibility. And invisible I was, except to the food. I woke before dawn to knead dough and didn't sit down until the soup had simmered, cooled, and been cleared from the table. The Whitmores ate well: French sauces, Italian pastas, roasts that melted on the tongue, and I took pride in every bite they never noticed. That was fine by me. It was easier that way. Charles Whitmore was a man of few expressions and even fewer emotions. He ruled the house like a man at war, with tight schedules, sharper words, and expectations that didn't bend for grief or joy. His wife, Marianne, was a ghost long before she died, always drifting through rooms with perfume and sadness. And then there was Eleanor. Eleanor was the spark in that cold house, a rebel in pearls and high heels. She'd lean over my prep table just to talk while I chopped onions, asking about my day or telling me some scandalous thing she'd read in the newspaper. She called me Mags, said I was the only sane person under that roof. She was the reason I stayed as long as I did. That girl gave the place color. Then one day, just like that, she was gone. The story they told was a car accident in France. Eleanor had gone on some impromptu trip, a solo escape from her father's iron grip. I remember the way Charles said it, like he was announcing a canceled flight, not the death of his only child. No tears, no funeral, just a black envelope on the dining table and silence. They said her body had been cremated overseas. No one ever saw her. And just like that, the spark was gone. I didn't believe it. I couldn't. Eleanor had written to me every week, without fail. Little postcards, scraps of thoughts, a recipe once scribbled on a napkin. Then, a month before the accident, the letters stopped. I asked Charles once, only once, what had happened. He looked at me like I was wallpaper. I never asked again. Left behind was Claire, a baby with eyes too old for her face, Eleanor's daughter. She was barely a year old when it happened. Charles raised her like a legacy, not a child. Nannies came and went, tutors too. But I stayed. I became the one constant in her world. I'd sneak her little treats between meals, braid her hair before school, tell her bedtime stories when the house was too quiet and cold. I loved that girl like she was mine. And then, last spring, she came back. Claire, now 22, all grown up and polished from her years in Boston, walked through the front door with a suitcase in one hand and 1,000 questions in her eyes. She looked like Eleanor, same posture, same fire, but quieter, like life had already taught her not to speak too loudly. She hugged me at the door. I remember her saying, "I miss the smell of your kitchen, Maggie." That simple line hit me harder than anything I'd heard in years. At dinner that night, it started. She sat across from Charles, still sharp, still dressed in tailored suits, but slower now, thinner, with tremors in his fingers he tried to hide. She asked about her mother, calmly at first, where she went, why she never came back, why there were no photographs of her in the house. Charles changed the subject. Claire didn't. That night, she came to the kitchen. She sat on the old stool by the window, where Eleanor used to perch. "Do you think my mother really died in France?" she asked me, and I froze. It was like someone had turned the past back on. I felt my throat close, my hands tremble. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to lie. But lies had kept me there too long. I didn't answer. I just placed a plate of cookies in front of her, the way I used to when she was small. But the truth, the one I'd buried for decades, started to push its way up like weeds through concrete. She came every night after that, asking more, remembering things. A lullaby I once hummed that she later recognized from one of Eleanor's letters. A photo she found in an old box with Eleanor's handwriting on the back. A recipe card tucked in a book that didn't match my writing. The storm was coming. I could feel it. And here's the thing, I'm not proud. I stayed silent when I should have screamed. I obeyed when I should have fought. I kept secrets because I thought it was safer. But when Claire came back, I realized some truths don't stay buried. They grow, they haunt, and eventually they demand to be told. So here I am, telling you. If you've ever wondered what goes on behind the doors of the rich, let me show you. Not the luxury, not the money, but the rot underneath. I saw it all. I kept it all. Until now. Stick with me. Hear it all. And then you tell me, what would you have done? When I think back to the years I spent at the Whitmore estate, it isn't the long hallways or the grand chandeliers that come to mind first. It's Eleanor. Always Eleanor. There was something about that girl that couldn't be ignored. She didn't walk into a room. She arrived like a gust of wind that knocked your breath sideways. She was the kind of woman who could wear a silk dress and muddy boots and still look like royalty. From the first day I met her, I knew she didn't belong in that house, not in the way her father wanted. I remember the first morning she came into my kitchen. She must have been 16, maybe 17. I was icing a lemon pound cake, and she walked in barefoot, with sleep still clinging to her curls and a notebook under her arm. "You know," she said, climbing up on the counter like she owned it, "you can tell a lot about a person by the way they treat the help." I raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. She grinned. "I like you, Maggie. You smell like cinnamon and rebellion." That's how it began. She was all sass and spark, with ideas too big for that house. Charles hated that. He wanted obedience. She gave him poetry. He wanted silence. She gave him questions, and not the polite kind. Eleanor would stand in the middle of the dining room and challenge his investments, his friends, even his books. I watched her walk that tightrope every day, knowing one misstep could snap it in two. But she didn't care. She pushed and prodded and poked until Charles would slam a glass down and leave the room. She never flinched. Not once. Still, there was a softness in her too. Late at night, when the mansion was still, she'd sit with me in the kitchen while I prepped for the next day. She'd ask about my past, my parents, what I believed in. No one ever asked me things like that, not even my own family after I started working there. But Eleanor listened, like what I had to say mattered. She loved cooking too. Not the act of it, really. She hated peeling garlic and always burned the toast. But she loved the magic of it, the way it could turn a mood, warm a silence. She told me once, "If I ever escape this place, Maggie, I want to open a little cafe, something with lavender tea and messy bookshelves." I smiled, but I didn't believe she'd ever leave. Not really. That house had roots like chains. Still, she tried. There were whispers of art school in New York, rumors of a scholarship, even a secret boyfriend once. Some boy from the university who wrote poems on napkins and smelled like paint thinner. Charles found out. The boy disappeared. I don't know how or what happened exactly, but Eleanor didn't speak for 3 days after that. She just stared out the window, arms wrapped around herself like she was holding in a scream. And then, one summer evening, she came into the kitchen with a suitcase. "I'm leaving," she said. Her eyes were lit with something wild. Hope or terror, I couldn't tell. "I'm going to France. I got into a residency program for young writers. It's real. I showed them my work and they accepted me. I didn't tell Father. I'm just going." I stopped what I was doing. I knew better than to interfere, but I also knew Charles wouldn't let her go that easily. She handed me an envelope. "If anything happens, keep this safe. Please, Maggie." I tucked it into my apron without a word. She hugged me tight and walked out into the dark. Weeks passed, then a month, and like clockwork, her letters started coming. They were beautiful, filled with vivid details, cafes by the river, readings in candlelit rooms, friendships with other writers who dressed like vagabonds and spoke 5 languages. She sounded free, alive. Then, just as suddenly, they stopped. No goodbye, no warning, just silence. At first I told myself it was the post, or maybe she'd gotten busy, but deep down I felt it. Something wasn't right. A month later, Charles made the announcement over breakfast. "There's been an accident," he said, like he was reading stock figures. "Eleanor's car went off a cliff near Marseille. The authorities say she died on impact." That was it. No funeral, no obituary, no ashes, just a sealed box that Charles placed on the mantel. No one was allowed to open it. I remember standing in my kitchen, holding a half-peeled carrot, unable to move. The pain hit me in waves, and then the questions came. Too many questions. Why had the letters stopped a full month before the accident? Why wasn't there a service? Why did Charles seem almost relieved? I wanted to scream, to storm into his office and demand answers. But I didn't. I went back to peeling carrots. Because that's what I did. I told myself it wasn't my place. I wasn't family. I was the help. I had a job, a bed, a pension. Speaking out would mean losing all of that. And where would I go? What would I do? So I stayed quiet. Years passed. The house grew colder. Claire grew older. And Eleanor faded into a whisper of memory. Her room was locked, her things packed away. It was like she never existed, but I never forgot. Sometimes I'd pull out that envelope, the one she gave me the night she left. I never opened it. Not once. I didn't have the courage. Or maybe I didn't want to face what might be inside. A cry for help. A final goodbye. Evidence. I didn't know. So I kept it tucked away in the back of my cookbook drawer, hidden under old clippings and forgotten recipes. Lately, though, I've started to wonder if my silence wasn't just fear, but betrayal. I loved that girl. She trusted me. And when it mattered most, I turned my back. People say silence is neutral, but it's not. Silence protects the powerful. It buries the truth. And maybe, just maybe, it helped Charles erase his daughter. I think about that every day now, especially with Claire back, especially with her digging, because the truth has claws, and it's starting to scratch its way out. And this time, maybe I won't look away. Claire was a quiet child, the kind who didn't cry much and rarely demanded anything. She had big eyes, too big for her little face, always watching, always absorbing. From the moment she could walk, she wandered the halls of that massive house like a ghost looking for something she couldn't name. And maybe that's exactly what she was. A child shaped by the absence of someone who should have held her first, sung to her at night, braided her hair in the mornings. Her mother's name wasn't spoken often in that house. When it was, it came in clipped tones, like a word too sharp to pronounce fully. Charles didn't believe in sentiment. He believed in order. Claire was enrolled in lessons before she could tie her shoes. Piano, French, fencing of all things. He scheduled her days like business meetings. The tutors came and went. Some lasted weeks, others mere days, but none of them lasted long. She was too curious, too resistant to the coldness that hung around her like the dust on the old portraits. She came to me often, sometimes without saying a word, just sat at the corner of the kitchen table while I rolled dough or stirred something on the stove. I never asked what she wanted. Children don't always come for answers. They come to be seen. And I made sure she knew she was seen. When she was 4, she asked me who taught me how to make apple pie. I told her it was my mother. She nodded and looked out the window. "I don't remember my mom," she said. "Do you?" I froze for a moment, my hands dusted with flour. I knew she didn't mean my mother. "I do," I said softly. She was very kind. She made a mess when she cooked, and she liked to hum while she worked. Claire didn't say anything for a long time. Then she asked, "Was my mom messy too?" I smiled. Oh, she was the messiest cook I ever met. Her eyes lit up just for a second, and then the light faded again, swallowed up by the house. I kept Eleanor alive in small ways. When I made chocolate chip pancakes on Sundays, I'd cut them into hearts, something Eleanor once did on a whim when Claire was still a baby. I'd sing the lullaby Eleanor hummed one rainy night while dicing onions. I kept a photo of her in a book no one ever opened. It was a game I played with myself, how much of Eleanor I could sneak into Claire's life without anyone noticing. As Claire grew, so did her questions. They were quiet at first, slipped between bites of toast or over late-night cocoa. Why don't we have any pictures of her? Did she like dogs? Was she funny? I answered what I could, always in pieces, like torn pages from a storybook. Enough to spark something, never enough to ignite it. By the time she was 10, she started collecting things. Small things. A button she found in the attic, a ring that didn't belong to any of the jewelry Charles approved, a ribbon tucked between the pages of a forgotten book. She stored them in an old wooden box under her bed. I saw it once while changing the linens. She caught me looking and asked, "Do you think these belong to her?" I wanted to lie. I wanted to say no, that she should leave the past alone, but I just said, maybe. She started writing letters after that. Letters to a mother she never knew. I found one once, folded in the bottom of the laundry basket, addressed simply to Mom. It said, "I wish you could see me now. I got an A in science." Grandfather didn't say anything, but Maggie made me pancakes. I cried in the pantry that day. Quietly, of course. Claire was 13 when the first real crack showed. She came home from school and went straight to the library. An hour later, she stormed into the kitchen, holding a newspaper clipping. This says she died in France, but the article is only one sentence. There's no funeral, no photo, nothing. I felt my blood run cold. She looked at me like she wanted me to say it was a mistake, that it wasn't true. I wiped my hands on a towel and said, "Sometimes people don't want others to know their pain." She didn't buy it. "That's not what it is. It's like, no one wants me to know her." I didn't have an answer for that, so I changed the subject. I made her tea and told her about a new recipe I was trying. But from that day on, she stopped asking the easy questions. Now she was hunting. When she was 16, she found the cookbooks. I always kept my old recipe books stacked on a narrow shelf by the pantry, dozens of them, pages stained with grease and memories. She pulled one out one afternoon, a red leather-bound book I hadn't touched in years. I saw her flipping through it while I stirred soup. Then she looked up, her eyes sharp. "Maggie," she said. "Who wrote this?" I turned. She was pointing to the margin of a page, a note written in looping, elegant script. It wasn't mine. It was Eleanor's. "It's a quote," Claire said, "from a French poem. Do you know what it means?" I swallowed hard. No, not really. She studied me. She knew I was lying, but she let it go. After that, I caught her going through more books. She found 3 more notes, a doodle of a flower, a tiny shopping list that didn't match my handwriting. Eleanor had used those books like journals, and somehow I had forgotten, or pretended to forget. They were still there. One night, Claire came into the kitchen while I was cleaning up. She carried a different book this time, one that had belonged to Eleanor's room. I didn't know how she got it. "This bookmark," she said, holding it out. "It's a plane ticket. It's not to France. It's to Montreal, dated a week before she was supposed to have left." I stared at the ticket like it might disappear. My knees felt weak. She watched me, waiting. "Maggie," she said, her voice cracking, "please, just tell me, did she really go to France?" I sat down. For the first time in years, I let myself look directly into her eyes. They were trembling with hope and fury. "I don't know," I whispered. "I don't know everything." But something in me broke that night. Maybe it was the way she said, "please." Maybe it was the way she looked like Eleanor when she was begging for truth. Or maybe I was just tired of holding it all alone. I got up, walked over to the drawer where I kept the old books, and pulled one from the bottom. It was Eleanor's favorite, the one with the blueberry muffin recipe she always ruined. I handed it to Claire. "There are more notes in there," I said quietly. "She wrote in the margins sometimes. Maybe there's something in there you need to see." Claire clutched it to her chest. She didn't thank me. She didn't have to. That was the night the silence began to unravel. And though I didn't know it yet, there was no going back. It started with the blueberry muffin book. Claire had taken it from me that night without another word and disappeared up to her room. I stayed in the kitchen, listening to the creaks in the ceiling above me as she moved, back and forth, pacing like she did when her mind was spinning. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even leave the kitchen. I sat there, the dim stove light casting long shadows, and tried to remember exactly how many books Eleanor had written in, how many pages had slipped through my fingers over the years, how many secrets had I cooked alongside lamb stew and Sunday roasts. The next morning, Claire came down with her hair pulled back and a look in her eyes I'd only ever seen in Eleanor, determined, focused, and just a little afraid. She didn't ask for breakfast. She placed the cookbook on the table between us and opened it to the back cover, where a folded piece of yellowed paper peeked out from the spine. She was scared, she said softly. You can see it, the way her handwriting changes. I reached for the letter, but Claire held it for a moment longer, like she wasn't ready to let me touch it yet. Then, slowly, she laid it flat on the table. It wasn't long, maybe 10 lines. It started with her usual cheer. Eleanor always tried to make things lighter than they were, but by the 5th line, the tone shifted. There are people watching me. I think Father knows. I told him about the money, the missing funds, and now he's different. I don't feel safe, Maggie. If anything happens to me, remember that I was never the kind of person who ran away. I read the words over and over until they blurred. Claire sat across from me, arms folded, eyes sharp. You knew, she said. I didn't answer right away. What was I supposed to say? That I'd found that letter years ago and tucked it back in the book out of fear? That I'd read it and convinced myself it was nothing, just Eleanor being dramatic? I read it once, I finally admitted. A long time ago. I didn't know what to do. I was afraid. Claire stood abruptly, pacing the floor with the book still in her hand. She didn't die in France, Maggie. I don't believe that anymore. Not after reading this. She was right. And I knew it. That day, she tore through the entire kitchen. Every cookbook, every drawer, every tin box where I'd stuffed old notes or recipes I didn't use anymore. I tried to stop her at first, told her it wasn't safe to dig into things that deep. But once Claire had momentum, there was no slowing her down. By sunset, we had 7 letters, all of them tucked into margins or hidden between pages like pressed flowers. The early ones were bright, full of stories about her travels, the people she met, little jokes she knew I'd laugh at. But then they darkened. One mentioned an argument with Charles about a man in his company, a young executive Eleanor accused of cooking the books. Another warned that she'd found documents in his study, evidence of transfers to offshore accounts. I think he's paying people off, one letter read. Not just lawyers, doctors, men in suits who don't smile. The final letter wasn't even finished. It ended mid-sentence, the ink trailing off the page as if she'd been interrupted. Claire looked up from that one with her hands shaking. She was going to expose him, and he stopped her. I couldn't speak. My chest felt like it was caving in. That night, Claire made a call. I listened from the hallway as she spoke in a hushed voice to someone named Jamie, her friend from college, a law student who had once interned at a nonprofit that helped reopen cold cases. I didn't catch every word, but I heard enough. Death certificates can be challenged, right? She asked. Even decades later? The next day, Jamie came to the estate, young, bright-eyed, and way too eager. He carried a laptop, a notepad, and a backpack full of legal folders. When I opened the door, he introduced himself with a nervous grin. I've heard a lot about you, Ms. Quinn, he said. Claire says you're the real heart of this house. I almost slammed the door on him, but Claire was behind him, looking at me with that same look Eleanor used to give when she needed something. We set up shop in the library. Jamie pulled up state records, legal databases, anything he could access without triggering alarms. Claire brought the letters, photocopies of them, along with the plane ticket she'd found and the article announcing Eleanor's death. That's when things started unraveling. First, the death certificate. It existed, but the registration date was nearly 2 months after the supposed accident. Claire pointed it out instantly. Why wait 2 months to file this? She said. That's not normal. Jamie agreed. He made notes, highlighting names, doctors, officials, administrators. One name came up twice, a psychiatrist from a private mental institution in upstate New York. He'd signed off on the certificate. Claire leaned over Jamie's shoulder and whispered, "That's not a coroner." Things snowballed from there. The institution didn't appear on any official state hospital list. It was private, shrouded in shell companies and silent board members. Jamie found a lawsuit from over 10 years ago, sealed but referenced in a federal court database, accusing the facility of unethical detainment practices. "She's alive," Claire said, her voice trembling. "He didn't kill her. He hid her." I sat in the armchair by the window, my hands balled in my apron. My mind kept going back to the nights Eleanor would sit by my stove and tell me about justice, about how truth mattered more than comfort. And there I was, holding on to comfort like it was a lifeline, while she disappeared into silence. Claire turned to me. "You knew something was wrong, didn't you?" I nodded. "Why didn't you say anything?" I looked at her then, really looked at her, the way her shoulders carried more weight than someone her age should bear, the way her jaw clenched like she was trying to stay strong for both of us. "Because I was a coward," I said. "Because I was afraid of losing everything. But mostly, because I didn't want to believe he could do something like that to his own daughter." Claire didn't respond. She didn't have to. Her silence was louder than any scream. That night, as I cleaned the counters and tried to find some peace in the familiar rhythm of my work, I realized peace was long gone. The oven beeped behind me, a reminder of the years I baked while Eleanor was erased, hidden away like an ingredient gone bad. The truth was rising now, bubbling up like a pot left too long on the stove, and I knew it would boil over. The truth didn't come all at once. It trickled in, slow and deliberate, like water through a crack in a dam, and before we knew it, the pressure was too much to hold back. Claire, with Jamie's help, spent nearly every waking moment buried in papers, links, legal files, even handwriting analyses. The house changed during that time. The air inside it grew tighter, heavier, like the walls themselves were waiting to be accused. One afternoon, Claire came rushing into the kitchen, holding a thick folder she'd printed from the library down in town. Her hands trembled as she dropped it on the counter, her breath shallow and sharp. "There was no burial," she said. I stopped chopping onions mid-slice. "No death certificate was filed in France," she continued, flipping open the folder. "Nothing in Marseille, nothing in any French consulate, nothing at all. It's not even a clerical error. It's a complete fabrication." My knees nearly gave out. I leaned against the counter and gripped the edge, afraid I'd collapse. I'd spent decades convincing myself I'd imagined it all, told myself the inconsistencies were just grief playing tricks on my mind. But Claire had pulled back the curtain, and there it was, empty space where a death should have been. Then came the records. Hospital intake forms from a private facility in upstate New York, a place I'd never heard of, operating under a name that didn't exist a few years earlier. Claire found it through a buried reference in an old legal settlement against one of Charles's shell corporations. And there, buried in the fine print, was a patient admitted 22 years ago under a false name, Elaine Monroe. She used a variation of her real name. Claire whispered. "It's her. Her birth date matches. The intake photo isn't clear, but Maggie, I know it's her." Jamie confirmed it later that evening. He cross-referenced dates, signatures, even travel records. Everything aligned too perfectly to be coincidence. The woman listed as Elaine had been brought in by court order, declared mentally unfit. No next of kin, no visitors allowed. The doctor who signed the forms? The same one who'd co-signed the phony death certificate years ago. Claire paced the kitchen, running her hands through her hair. He paid them. He bought her silence. He buried her without ever digging a grave. I sat at the table, my hands clenched in my lap. Every bone in my body ached. I'd been holding this secret, this truth. For so long it had started to rot inside me. And so, I told her everything. I told her about the letter Eleanor had given me the night she left, how I'd hidden it in a drawer and never opened it. I told her about the whispered arguments I heard between father and daughter, about the night Charles had locked himself in his study for hours after Eleanor vanished. I told her how I'd watched the lights go out in that house, first in Eleanor's room, then in everyone's hearts. I knew something was wrong, I whispered. I knew, and I did nothing. Claire knelt in front of me, her face inches from mine. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "You were scared." I nodded. "And weak." She shook her head. "You kept her alive for me, even in the smallest ways. And now we have to finish this." She meant it. I could see it in her eyes. There was no stopping her now. She'd passed a threshold, and the girl I helped raise had turned into a woman on fire. She wasn't just looking for answers anymore. She was hunting justice. She waited until Charles was alone in the study, as he always was late in the day. The same room he'd locked Eleanor out of so many times before. The doors were thick oak, always shut tight, like the secrets inside. I watched from the hallway, heart pounding like a war drum. Claire didn't knock. She pushed the doors open with both hands and walked in like she belonged there. Charles looked up from his leather chair, his reading glasses perched low on his nose. He didn't stand, didn't smile. "Claire," he said flatly, "you look exhausted." She closed the doors behind her. I couldn't hear everything, but I stayed near the edge of the corridor, far enough not to be seen, close enough to catch fragments. "You lied to me," she said. Her voice didn't waver. Charles didn't respond immediately. Then I heard the clink of glass, probably pouring himself a drink. "What are you talking about?" he said calmly. "You lied about my mother." A long pause followed. Then, in that cold, clinical tone he mastered so well, Charles said, "Your mother had problems." Claire's voice rose just a bit. "She had truth, and you silenced her." "You don't understand the world the way I do," he snapped. "She was going to destroy everything I built. She was reckless, unstable." "She was your daughter," Claire said, louder now. "You erased her." I heard the sound of a glass hitting wood hard, but not shattering. "She was going to ruin us," Charles hissed. "I did what was necessary." Then there was silence, heavy and thick. Claire must have been staring him down, and I imagined him trying to hold her gaze, failing. "She's still alive," she said, barely above a whisper, "and I'm going to bring her back." Another silence. Then Charles said, with an edge of something that might have been fear, "You don't know what you're doing." "No," Claire said, "but I know what you did." The door creaked open a moment later, and Claire walked out. She didn't look at me as she passed, but I saw the tears in her eyes, blinking fast, as if she was trying to hold them back for just a few more steps. I went in after her, not knowing what I'd say, but needing to see him. Charles sat at his desk, a drink untouched beside him, his hands trembling ever so slightly. He looked at me, really looked. "I gave you everything," he said, voice low and tired. "And you betrayed me." "I kept your secrets," I replied. That was the betrayal. He didn't answer, just turned away, staring out the window as if hoping the world outside would swallow him whole. And in that moment, I didn't see the powerful man who'd ruled that house with silence and money. I saw a crumbling old man, stripped of the lie that kept him warm. But the storm wasn't over. It had just begun. The morning of the shareholder meeting, the house was so quiet I could hear the wind tracing its fingers along the window panes. Claire was already gone, dressed in a navy suit she'd borrowed from one of Jamie's contacts, her hair pinned back, her eyes sharp as glass. She hadn't slept the night before. I knew because I hadn't either. I'd heard her pacing her room long after midnight, murmuring bits of her speech under her breath, tightening every sentence like she was winding a spring. I stood in the kitchen, fingers wrapped around a mug of lukewarm tea, watching the clock move in slow ticks. I couldn't help but feel like something irreversible was about to happen. I wanted to stop it and see it happen all at once. It was like staring at the sky just before a storm. Beautiful, ominous, inevitable. The meeting was being held at the Whitmore Tower in downtown Hartford. A tall, glass monolith that looked more like a monument to ego than a place of business. I'd only been there once, years ago, for a holiday party where I stayed in the back near the caterers and never made eye contact with the executives. But that day, Claire walked through the front doors like she owned the marble beneath her feet. Jamie was by her side, carrying a leather folder packed with documents, certified letters, photocopies, legal affidavits, and that hospital intake form that had burned into my memory. They didn't go there to ask for answers. They went to deliver a reckoning. Inside, the room was packed with shareholders, board members, assistants taking notes on tablets. The usual sterile decor, gray suits, steel chairs, bottled water, and branded notepads. At the head of the long table sat Charles Whitmore, thinner than he'd ever been, his skin pale and drawn, hands trembling slightly, even as he tried to clasp them still. Claire stood when the microphone was passed to her. The official agenda had barely started. She wasn't on it. That didn't stop her. "My name is Claire Whitmore," she began, "and I'm here today to tell you that the company you trust with your investments has been built on a lie." There were murmurs right away, low and skeptical. Charles shifted in his chair, but didn't interrupt. Maybe he thought it would blow over. Maybe he underestimated her. Claire continued. She told them about Eleanor, how she had supposedly died in France under vague, unverified circumstances. Then she held up the documents, one by one. The missing French death certificate, the sealed intake papers from the private institution, the falsified records from the family estate. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She laid it out like a prosecutor. My grandfather paid to have my mother declared mentally unfit and locked away, she said. He falsified her death. He forged documents. And he used his power to erase her existence, all to protect his empire from exposure. Gasps. Raised voices. A few people laughed in disbelief, but Jamie stepped up then and dropped another bomb. Financial records tying Charles's personal funds to illegal transfers through shell companies connected to that same institution. Payments listed as consulting fees or private services, all traced to the months following Eleanor's disappearance. Eleanor Whitmore is alive, Jamie said, and we have the evidence to prove it. At that moment, chaos erupted. Board members demanded recess. Reporters in the back, tipped off by Jamie hours before, rushed forward. Cameras flashed. The security team stepped in too late. Claire had already said what needed to be said. The genie wasn't going back in the bottle. Charles sat frozen. I saw the footage later, on the 6 o'clock news. His jaw clenched, but his eyes looked like a man staring into a hole he dug with his own hands. He didn't speak. He didn't even stand. He simply sat there, surrounded by decades of curated power, and watched it all crumble. That night, the news exploded. Not just locally, nationally. Headlines ran with phrases like "Heir exposes billionaire cover-up" and "Whitmore empire built on family lies." News anchors replayed the footage of Claire's speech again and again, cutting between her words and grainy photos of Eleanor from years ago. One station even ran a side-by-side of Eleanor's last-known image and the intake photo from the institution. The resemblance was undeniable. Social media took it further. People began demanding justice, calling for criminal investigations, shareholder boycotts, corporate restructuring. The empire Charles built wasn't just collapsing. It was being dragged down piece by the truth he tried so hard to bury. At the estate, I sat in front of the television and watched the story unfold like it wasn't mine, like it was just some drama written by someone cruel and clever. I saw photos of Eleanor flash across the screen and felt the old ache rise in my chest. There she was, visible, real, no longer erased. The silence was broken. Reporters showed up at the gates. Drones buzzed above the property like angry bees. I unplugged the landline after the 5th call. Some were journalists, some were strangers. One woman just cried into the receiver before hanging up. I don't know if she was someone Eleanor had known once, or just someone who felt the weight of what had been hidden. Claire stayed away from the house that night. She knew the cameras would follow her. Instead, she went to Jamie's apartment downtown, where they compiled everything they had and started building the next step: legal filings to request access to Eleanor, to prove she had been wrongfully institutionalized, to bring her home. As for Charles, he didn't leave the tower. He was escorted out by security hours later, his expression blank, his steps slow. The board voted to suspend him indefinitely. There was talk of freezing assets, of launching a federal investigation. Everything he had built to last beyond his lifetime was being dismantled in days. I stood on the back porch that night, looking out over the gardens Eleanor used to run through. The moon hung low and heavy, like it was watching too. I felt tired in my bones, more tired than I had in years. The truth had finally come out. But the cost? I don't think any of us had begun to understand it yet. Because bringing something to light doesn't fix it. It only shows you how dark it really was. The care home wasn't on any map we could find. Claire had to fight tooth and nail through bureaucratic red tape to even confirm Eleanor's existence on paper. Jamie filed court orders, leveraged media pressure, and chased leads until finally, after what felt like a lifetime, Claire received a single-page confirmation. Patient, Elaine Monroe. Admission, 22 years ago. Diagnosis, schizoaffective disorder, unverified. Status, stable. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The facility sat at the edge of a wooded town upstate, nestled in the kind of place people go to disappear. No signage, no advertisements, no visitors allowed unless pre-approved. Claire and Jamie drove there with a court document granting them access, while I stayed behind. Not because I didn't want to go, but because I wasn't sure I deserved to. The day Claire left, she hugged me tight at the door and said, "She asked about you, in the letters, all the time." I didn't answer. I just nodded, clutching the handle of the old teapot I'd been cleaning, even though it was already spotless. My heart pounded harder with each minute that passed after they drove off. Claire didn't call me that night, or the next. I barely slept, waiting for news I couldn't prepare myself to hear. I tried to distract myself, organizing cabinets, scrubbing floors I'd already cleaned 100 times, sitting out on the porch long after sunset, but nothing worked. When she finally returned 2 days later, she looked older, not in a tired way, but in a way that made me ache, like she'd crossed through something irreversible. "She's there," Claire said, setting down her bag. "And she's alive." But she didn't need to finish the sentence. I saw it in her eyes. "She didn't recognize me," she said. "At first, she looked past me like I was just another nurse. But then, something changed." Claire pulled out a photograph. It was faded, worn along the edges. It was a picture of Eleanor and Claire, taken when she was a baby. Eleanor cradling her in a park, sunlight in her hair. Claire had shown her the photo, and Eleanor had stared at it for a long time. She said, "That's mine." That's all. But her voice cracked. Claire told me Eleanor was heavily medicated, her responses slow, her hands shaking from years of chemical restraints. The staff at the home said she was cooperative but distant, as though being numb was a virtue. I couldn't wait anymore. 3 days later, I went to see her myself. The drive was quiet, the road winding through forest and fog. Jamie had to pull strings to get me temporary clearance, and I clutched the letter like a passport to another life. When we arrived, the receptionist looked me over like I was the past returned. They led me through clean white corridors that smelled like antiseptic and time. When we reached her room, the nurse knocked once and opened the door. She was sitting in a chair by the window, staring at the trees. Her hair had gone gray, thin and short now. She wore a pale blue cardigan and slippers that didn't match. Her hands rested in her lap, folded gently like she was praying. "Eleanor," the nurse said softly, "you have a visitor." She turned her head slowly. Her eyes, those same sharp, bright eyes, met mine, but they were dulled, like glass left out in the rain. I stepped forward. My legs didn't feel like my own. "Eleanor," I whispered. "It's Maggie." She blinked. Then again. I sank to my knees beside her. "It's me, sweetheart." My voice cracked. "I should have come sooner. I should have fought harder." She didn't speak, but her fingers twitched slightly. "I was so scared," I continued. "I thought I was protecting you by staying quiet, but I wasn't. I just disappeared with you." A tear slid down her cheek, and that broke me. I sobbed, right there on the floor of that sterile room, clutching her hand like it was the last solid thing in the world. I cried for the years lost, for the girl who used to twirl around my kitchen, for the woman the world forgot. She didn't say anything, but her fingers curled around mine. That was enough. Claire came in quietly later and placed a soft blanket over Eleanor's lap. She looked at me, eyes red but steady. "I'm taking her home," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a decision. There was a battle, of course. Legal arguments, medical evaluations, threats from staff and the facility's board. But public pressure worked in our favor. The media had turned Eleanor into a symbol, a living scar of institutional corruption and patriarchal cruelty. The home didn't want the bad press. They released her under supervised transition. Back at the estate, things were different. Claire set up a room on the ground floor, painted the walls with warm colors, filled it with books, old music, fresh flowers. She hired a specialist, someone gentle, experienced in trauma care. It wasn't a perfect arrangement. Some days Eleanor spoke in fragments, other days she stared out the window for hours, humming tunes only she could hear. But she was safe. She was home. Charles, by then, had withdrawn entirely. The board removed him from Whitmore Industries. Lawsuits piled up. His assets were frozen. The house, the mansion that once stood like a fortress, became a tomb of secrets. Claire didn't want to keep it. Neither did I. We sold it to a restoration group. They planned to turn it into a public historical site. "Let people walk through the past," Claire said. "Let them feel the silence. When the moving trucks came, I packed up my things in 2 small boxes, one of clothes, the other of letters, photos, and the old cookbooks where the truth had waited in ink and flour. Claire offered me a room in her new house, just outside the city. It was smaller, sunnier, filled with mismatched furniture and the scent of lavender and lemon. "You won't be my cook," she said. "You'll be my family." I cried again then, quietly, not for what I lost, but for what, against all odds, I still had. The house is gone now. Not physically. It still stands, tall and proud in its architecture, with ivy crawling up the stone walls like time trying to reclaim what man built. But the soul of the house, the silence that used to seep into every crack and corner, is gone. That silence, thick as syrup, heavy with secrets, once ruled over everything. Now, all that remains are echoes, and not the kind that haunt, but the kind that remind. I sometimes find myself walking in dreams through the old halls, past the dining room where Charles used to sit in unflinching command, past the grand staircase Eleanor used to run down barefoot when she thought no one was watching. My feet remember the creaks in the floorboards better than my memory recalls faces now. But one thing is always clear in those dreams: the sound of a woman humming in the kitchen and the laughter of a girl who never stopped looking for the truth. That girl saved us all. For more than 40 years, I was the cook in that house. But in truth, I was also a witness, a silent accomplice to a history that should have never been written. I made meals while lives were broken. I folded napkins while a daughter was erased. I stirred sauces while a granddaughter was raised without the truth of who she came from. And for that, I will always carry shame. People often think that inaction is harmless, that silence is neutral. But let me tell you, silence is a decision. It's a chain wrapped tight around your neck, one link at a time, until you forget you were ever free. I told myself I was protecting myself, that I needed my job, that it wasn't my place. But that lie, small and manageable at first, grew teeth. It chewed through years. It devoured a family. I could have spoken up, I could have told someone, I could have screamed, but I didn't. And Eleanor paid the price. I sit now in a small home just outside the city. Claire lives here, with Eleanor in the room next to hers. The house is nothing like the estate. The windows are mismatched. The garden's a little wild. The floors creak in all the wrong places. But there's life here, real life. The kind that breathes and forgives and tries again, even after the storms. Eleanor has good days and bad. On the good days, she asks for tea and remembers the name of her favorite poet. She'll hum a song from her youth or tap her fingers to the rhythm of a memory. She even writes, slowly, painfully, sentences that take shape like birds learning to fly again. On the bad days, she stares at the walls and sees things that aren't there. She asks where she is, sometimes who Claire is. And Claire, God bless her, never loses her patience. She just holds her hand and waits, watching them rebuild. Watching them stitch together a life from broken pieces has been the only healing I've known. I don't believe in perfect endings anymore, but I do believe in small redemptions. And this is mine. I still cook, now and then, not out of duty, but out of love. Claire's favorites are still the same: pancakes on Sundays, grilled cheese with too much butter, pasta with extra garlic. And sometimes, when Eleanor's feeling strong, she joins me in the kitchen. She doesn't do much, just stirs a pot, maybe peels an apple, but it means everything. One afternoon, she looked up from the cutting board and said, "This feels like something I used to love." I couldn't speak. I just placed a hand on hers and nodded. We talk sometimes, Claire and I, about the mansion, about what it stood for, what it covered up. She once said she hated it, that every room felt like a lie. But then she smiled and added, "But it's where I found the truth too." She's stronger than I ever was. Now I turn to you. Yes, you, sitting there, listening to this story. What would you have done in my place? If you knew something was wrong, truly wrong, but speaking out meant losing everything, would you have stayed silent? Would you have told yourself it wasn't your business, not your family, not your fight? Or would you have risked it all to tell the truth? I ask because I've lived both lives. And I promise you, the cost of silence is greater than you think. It takes something from you, something deep, And once it's gone, it doesn't come back easy. So tell me, what would you have done? Would you have stood by? Would you have opened your mouth? Don't just listen to my story. Answer it. In the comments below, tell me what you would have done. Would you have risked your job, your safety, your future to help someone who trusted you? Or would you have played it safe? And if you've ever carried a truth too heavy to speak, maybe this is your sign to let it out. And if you want to hear more truths like mine, raw, painful, real, make sure to follow. I've got more stories than recipes now, and maybe it's time they were all heard.